Good morning, everybody. This is the TSMU fan here, and today we'll be reviewing the last special to be animated by Nitrogen Studios' Blue Mountain Mystery. Sorry that this one took a little bit longer to come out. I was again occupied with things like other video projects, so I just kind of fell behind. But without further ado, let's start this video off. The plot of this movie is that Thomas is sent to the Blue Mountain Quarry to work with the narrow gauge engines after Paxton has a serious accident. While Thomas is working at the quarry, he keeps seeing a mysterious engine, and the other narrow gauge engines tell him that the engine's name is Luke. No, not that Luke. There we go, that's better. The other engines tell him that he is hiding because he did something bad. Thomas eventually becomes friends with Luke, and he tells him that a long time ago, he bumped an engine into the sea as he was being unloaded when he first came to Sodor. Thomas now has to try and find the clues before Diesel can tell Sir Topham Hatt and get Luke sent away for what he did. Now, let's start out with the bad things about this movie. Granted, there aren't many, but they still need to be talked about. The worst thing about this movie was the part at the end where Thomas gets a ride from Owen and chases after Luke on the narrow gauge track. What the actual heck? Is Thomas really that desperate and stupid to try something like that? He's a standard gauge engine. He doesn't even fit on their tracks. I mean, it even says in the movie
Thomas couldn't follow the little green engine along the narrow gauge rails. His wheels were too big.
I mean, seriously. You say that and then you immediately have Thomas going off and doing something as stupid as, well, that? And then immediately after that, when Luke rescues Thomas and he's too heavy for Owen, what in the world is happening here? This last segment definitely needed a major rewrite before entering production because it's just too silly for a movie like this. Another thing that I didn't necessarily like was how the narrow gauge engines were handled. I mean, they're handled just fine throughout the majority of this movie, but at the end of the movie when Thomas tells Luke that he talked to Victor, that's when it starts to get a bit questionable. It makes sense that they would be upset with Thomas because he did break the promise to keep Luke's story a secret, but why are they all being such jerks about it? Maybe instead of them all acting extremely out of character, Skarloey could overhear Thomas telling Luke that he talked to Victor, and then he would tell the other engines about it. The narrow gauge engines would then confront Thomas and tell him that what he did was wrong and that he broke his promise. And since Luke trusted Thomas before, maybe this could be a moment where all of this character interaction is completely ruined, and now Thomas is back to square one with Luke being very shy about him and not wanting to talk to him. This would give Thomas much more reason to try and find Luke and tell him the truth. It would overall work a lot better. And while I have said before in the past that I like Diesel's character in this movie, towards the end of the movie he just feels like he's there just to be a jerk to Thomas. I think that they could have fixed this by having Diesel be the one to go and find Sir Topham Hatt, so that way there's a time limit on how much time Thomas has to find Luke and tell him the whole story. Doing it this way would keep the audience engaged and would overall have them rooting for Thomas to find Luke and tell him the truth before Diesel returns. Now, I love this movie as much as any other Thomas fan, but I find it so weird that the climax doesn't even happen until the end of the movie. I mean, sure, you could argue that Victor telling Thomas that he was the yellow engine was the climax, but it doesn't really seem that way to me. A climax is the most exciting, intense, or most important part of a story, and while Victor being from a different country is very important to the plot, it's not the most exciting or intense part of the story. So again, I ask, why does the climax happen so late into the movie? It isn't really a big problem that I have, because the movie is still good, but it's just something that I wanted to point out. Another bad thing that I noticed is,
That is why I will forgive you for not working on your branch line.
wait, why? Why are you forgiving Thomas for very clearly abandoning his work to see his friend? Especially since we know that Thomas does something even worse later on. Wait a minute. It was you, wasn't it? It was you who forgave Thomas for not working on his branch line, which led to him doing this, wasn't it? Stupid Topham. But anyways, what other problems does this movie have? Not much else. Except for maybe Henry being in his new shape in his flashback sequence, creating a continuity error, there's not really much else wrong with this movie. So let's move on to what is actually good in this movie. The best part about this movie, by far, is the classic series flashbacks that I just mentioned earlier. When I watched this movie for the first time, these scenes took me totally by surprise. And it's just so surreal to see, especially considering this movie was written by Sharon Miller. But I'll talk about why this movie was so good later. For now, let's look at what else was well done in this movie. The fact that we get a special that revolves around the narrow gauge engines is so surreal. Seeing them for the first time in CGI is just so wonderful. I love how they kind of made the models look like the ones that they used in season 5 onwards, considering those were the models that they used in seasons such as season 9 or season 10, except for the occasional appearances of the small scale models used in season 4, but those don't count. It's so nice to finally see the narrow gauge engines in full CGI when they were previously only briefly mentioned in Here Are the Rails. I also love how most of what is said by the characters feels natural, and the conversation in the sheds with the flashback sequences supports that. Unfortunately, this special still suffers from the same use of simple words to get the point across. Another thing that I really liked about this movie was how Victor's flashback was handled. When we first saw Victor in Here Are the Rails, we could already tell that he was from a foreign country. Even his bassist, the Minaz number 1173, is from Cuba. As such, the character spoke in a Spanish accent, and in this movie, we actually get to hear him speak Spanish. This sequence was brilliantly handled and gives Victor some much needed character development. And like the Unlucky Tug said in his Blubber review, this was handled a lot better than Nia's character in the series and the movie by far. But I'll save that discussion for when I review Big World, Big Adventures. I also need to mention the music in this special. As I've said before in the past, Hartshorn always did a great job of giving these movies excellent soundtracks, and this movie is no exception. Whether it's the intro music, which sounds really epic and happy at the same time, the catchy song that is working together, or the Spanish feel the music has when Victor is loaded on the ship in his flashback, the music here is just brilliantly done. I think my favorite theme from this movie has to be the different renditions of Luke's theme. I also really like how we finally get to hear Annie and Clarabelle talk in this movie when they had only made cameos before. The voices they have are really fitting, and I like how they kind of remind Thomas to be safe and follow the rules. It does seem a little bit questionable why they would do that, but come on, they reminded Thomas to go slow and Thomas saves the day from season 8. And in the classic series, they tried to get Thomas to stop when he accidentally left Clarabelle's guard behind. So in my opinion, it seems fitting that they would remind Thomas about the rules, but I think that there should have been a little bit more to them than just that in this movie. And thankfully, Brenner was able to fix this problem in subsequent seasons. This movie also had a lot of funny moments that made me chuckle, such as the relationship between Winston and Sir Topham Hatt. The part at the beginning of the movie where Sir Topham Hatt tries to stop Winston in the right place to talk to Thomas has me dying every time I watch it. I also really like the scene where Diesel is trying to tell Sir Topham Hatt about Luke, but he wants him to help Mavis, who is stuck on the tracks in front of him. And oh my gosh, what Mavis says to Diesel when he buffers up to her is so hilarious to me. I love her snarky personality that we see in both this movie and in Here Are the Rails, and it really suits her feisty character that she had in the classic series. Paxton is also a really funny character, and I really like his clumsy and inept personality. The part at the beginning when he gets hit by the rock is so funny, and I love how he wants to be like Diesel and follow him around, but his innocent personality brings him to help out the other engines in the end. Like when he sends Sir Topham Hatt and Mr. Percival to the quarry like Diesel told him to do, but he also goes and gets Victor from the steamworks like Thomas told him to do. I also really like how his character's been thoroughly expanded upon in the Brenner era, and I overall love his character. Another funny moment that really makes me laugh is the Kevin scene right before Thomas asks Victor if he fixed a yellow engine. Kevin is such a clumsy but funny character, and this scene makes me laugh every time I see it. I also really like how this movie is one of the first few Thomas movies to have a prologue before the official movie starts. I love how this is carried over into future Thomas movies, and I really like it because it provides you with some good action and humor to get the movie off to a great start and really show what happened at the quarry. Another thing that I really liked about this movie was that the narrow gauge engines had the same character that they had in the classic series. for the most part. Skarloey is old and wise and has that same storytelling personality that we see in Gallon Old Engine. Rheneas has a wise personality too, and I love how he's kind of vain about his paint getting scratched. Granted, that's more a character trait of James than it is of Rheneas, but I feel it kind of works. Sir Handel has a calmer personality, and it more resembles how he's portrayed in later seasons as a wise and changed engine from what he was in episodes like A Bad Day for Sir Handel. Peter Sam has a sort of cheeky but friendly personality like we see in episodes like You Can't Win, and from what we see in this special, Rusty has that helpful and kind personality we see in episodes like Home at Last and Rusty to the Rescue. I'd say that the only personality that really needed to be worked on was Rheneas's, but it doesn't really bother me that much anyway. It's a really small nitpick when the movie has so many good things to offer. I also like how this special is really the only other special to have an after credits scene other than The Great Race. The after credits scene itself is pretty amusing too, with Rheneas finally getting a new coat of paint and Victor joking about how he finally found the yellow engine. I also really like Luke's character in this movie, and he brings a really good message that it's not okay to live in guilt for things that you've done in the past. You always need to look on the bright side of things, and I feel that this moral was handled much better than just forcefully inserting it in and having it come out of nowhere. And with that, I think that just might be all the good things in this movie. But before I move on to talking about the miscellaneous things I noticed in this movie, let's talk about the new characters. I already talked about Luke, and I mentioned Paxton earlier in both this review and in my Day of the Diesels review. So I guess let's start by talking about Owen and Merrick. Owen is an interesting character, and he is definitely different from the Incline that was seen in the classic series. Merrick is also a really funny character, always falling asleep on the job. He kind of reminds me of Snorlax from Pokemon. Sleepy and tired, but friendly nonetheless. I mentioned the relationship between Winston and Sir Topham Hatt earlier, and I think Winston is a really great character. Sir Topham Hatt already had a car that let him travel around the roads, and I guess it makes sense for him to get something that lets him travel along the rails. With that, that's all the new characters that were introduced in this movie, so let's now move on to the miscellaneous things I noticed in the movie. So I mentioned earlier on, when I talked about the good things of this special, that I would explain why this movie ended up being a really good one. And you want to know why? You want to know why this movie ended up being such a brilliant masterpiece? Pause it right here. Do you see what I see? Yep, that's right. Andrew Brenner worked as a script editor for this movie, and now it makes perfect sense why this movie was so incredibly good, doesn't it? The absolute genius Andrew Brenner, who pulled the show out of its first dark age and made the show great again, worked on this movie as a script editor. I guess this was just signs of things to come in the future, wasn't it? But anyways, moving on from that. By looking on the wiki, I also realized that Duncan was originally planned to be in this movie, but when the production crew went to the Tallyclin Railway to measure the Skarloey engine's bases, Duncan's basis, which is named Douglas, was being overhauled. Thus the crew could not measure him for the movie and he was dropped. Thankfully, Duncan did make his first full CGI appearance in the episode Duncan and the Grumpy Passenger. Another thing that I noticed from looking on the wiki was that apparently the man who was trying to flag Rheneas down at the beginning of the movie was none other than Old Bailey from the season 5 episode Haunted Henry. To be honest, I never knew that was Old Bailey until I looked on the wiki and happened to stumble upon that little piece of interesting trivia. Another nice little Easter egg that was in the movie was that when Thomas goes into the diesel works to look for a yellow engine, a scrap model of the Marklin engine can be seen. For those who don't know, the Marklin engine was an engine that would haul goods trains in season 1. If you ever see a goods train leaving the screen with no confirmed engine pulling it, chances are the Marklin engine was pulling that train. However, when season 2 rolled around, the crew had more engines to work with, and thus the Marklin engine was scrapped. Its remains can be seen in the episode Edward Trevor and the Really Useful Party, and Greg Kiernan decided to put the Marklin engine in the movie as a nod to how the scrapped version appeared in various other episodes. If I'm being honest, that's a really nice Easter egg, and it's a reference that fans will get if they know the origins of the Marklin engine, so I give them a lot of credit for incorporating this nice little Easter egg in the movie. Something else I noticed is that when Thomas reaches the bottom of Owen and crashes onto the unloading platform, he rolls his eyes like how the classic series models rolled their eyes. That was a really nice nod to the classic series, and I definitely feel that a lot of fans will get that reference too. Another thing that I'd like to mention from looking on the wiki was that apparently Thomas going down Owen's incline was inspired by a real life event with a Manning Wardle L-class locomotive during 1925. If that's the case, that still doesn't excuse how unrealistic this scene is. Sure, it might be inspired by a real-life event, but the scene still doesn't really work in my opinion. It's just way too silly and outlandish for a movie like this. However, I will say that the part where Luke pulls Thomas to safety was very well done, and you definitely feel like Luke was a real hero for rescuing Thomas. The tension of the scene where Luke is trying to get away from Thomas towards the beginning of the movie was also really well done. And Thomas's frantic whistling really nails the "stop" feel the scene gives off. Actually, speaking of the scene where Luke saves Thomas, I saw someone talk on Twitter about the fact that the music that plays when Luke rescues Thomas is the same music that plays at the end of the episode The Thomas Way. That's really interesting, and it's definitely something I never noticed before. However, reusing music is not unheard of. I mean, heck, even Mike and Jr. aren't vulnerable to this, and they reused a variant of Percy's theme that was in the Season 5 episode Bah in the Season 6 episode Percy's Chocolate Crunch. But anyways, it's kind of nice when music gets reused, because then you get that feeling of, hey, I've heard that song before. Anyways, moving on. Another thing that I noticed while watching the movie was that the London Bridge scene at the beginning always reminded me of the classic tune, London Bridge is Falling Down. I'm not sure if this reference was intentional or not, but I always chuckle when I hear Old Bailey say, because it always reminds me of the London Bridge song. Another thing that I noticed while looking on the wiki was that this special was released the same year that Victor's bassist was rescued from a sugar mill. You know, that's so incredibly coincidental because this movie just so happened to be about Victor getting restored from his original livery. I'm not sure if this was intentional either, but I'm sure it can't be because that's just too perfect. The timing couldn't have been better there. But anyways, another thing that I noticed by looking on the wiki was that the special was apparently slowed down, and it adds an extra 2 minutes to the special's length. As a result, the audio is distorted. And I'll say that all the times that I've watched this movie, even as a little kid, I never noticed any audio errors. Well, except for this one.
I wonder...
Another thing that I noticed from looking on the wiki was that a working title for this movie was The Runaway Engine. Honestly, I think that Blue Mountain Mystery is a much better title, as The Runaway Engine sounds kind of misleading. It almost makes it sound as if the whole movie is centered around an engine trying to stop a runaway train, which is actually what I thought the Season 21 episode Runaway Engine was going to be about. But that's not the case. Blue Mountain Mystery sounds a lot better than The Runaway Engine, just like The Great Discovery sounds better than Leader of the Track. Another thing that I'd like to point out is that in the first storyboard sketch of the Blondin Bridge scene, 2 trucks from Renese's train were going to fall off the bridge and make Paxton's accident a little more severe. Additionally, the keystone that falls next to Paxton in the final movie was originally going to land in front of him on the tracks in the original storyboard sketch. I'd also like to point out that for whatever reason in this special, the backside of Annie is colored black. I don't know if this is an error or not, but it's not seen on any of the CGI orthos of her, so I assume that it is. Another little thing that I'd like to mention is that when I first saw this movie when I was little, I always wondered why they changed Skarloey and Rhaeus' whistle sounds. They also changed Rusty's horn and modified Peter Sam's whistle a bit. I always wondered why they did this and didn't just reuse the original whistle sound effects. Maybe it was so that they were a little more unique than what they were originally, I don't know. I never noticed this, but in the scene where Luke is trapped between all the engines, he actually shakes a little bit in fear. This is a much better way to handle bouncing than what the rest of the series presents us with. Keep the weight of the engine in mind and really only do it when they're laughing or are afraid of something. And keep it low and not exaggerated so that the audience will barely notice it. I also noticed that when Skarloey almost loses his cab, I guess if Thomas hadn't warned him, it would have been a Railway series reference. But anyways, another thing that I noticed while watching this movie was
he thinks that if anyone finds him, he will be sent away from Sodor forever.
Forever. Forever. Forever.
Sorry, I just had to make that reference. And of course, this movie was the last movie to be written by Sharon Miller. Thank freaking gosh! Now we won't have to deal with any more unrealistic crap in Thomas and Friends. Now we can just sit back and watch the show with more realism than before. Oh. We're not done just yet. Anyways, I think that might just be everything that I wanted to mention. So I'm going to end this review here. This movie was definitely the pinnacle of the Miller era and was a good look into Thomas's bright future. Unfortunately, that future would soon become cloudy once again.
But that's another story.
Anyways, thanks for watching, and make sure to like and subscribe. I'll see you all in my King of the Railway review coming soon. This is the TSMU fans signing out.